The Roman Empire was one of the most impressive empires in world history and possessed some of the widest borders. However, this magnificent empire was built entirely upon the system of slavery. Rome's victories, territorial gains, and prosperity rose upon the shoulders of millions of chained slaves. One of these slaves was Spartacus, who launched the greatest slave rebellion in history against the Roman Empire. Before being enslaved, Spartacus was a Thracian soldier who had served in the Roman army. One day, when the Roman Empire asked him to attack his own people, he refused to obey his commander. He fled, was captured, and was enslaved. He was then sold to a cruel man named Lentulus Gladiatus, who trained gladiators in Capua. Everyone who saw him when he joined the school understood that he was different. He fought skillfully during training sessions and impressed both gladiators and instructors alike. In a short time, he became a leader in the eyes of the other slaves and gained fame throughout Capua. This fame even reached Rome. One day, Gladiatus, who was renowned for the success of his gladiators, received an invitation from a fighting event in Rome. He would select his best gladiators and send them to Rome to fight before the public. For Spartacus and the others, this meant death, because in the shows in Rome, there was no mercy for defeated gladiators. For Spartacus, who constantly had the idea of escape on his mind, this was the last straw. Together with his close friends Crixus, Enemos, Castus, and Gannicus, he prepared an escape plan. Their goal was to break their chains before entering the Roman arena. On a summer night in the year 73 BC, the plan was put into action. Initially, it was expected that 200 gladiators would participate in this rebellion. However, the plan was leaked and the guards were put on alert. Still, around 70 gladiators remained loyal to the plan. They had only kitchen knives, clubs, and stones in their hands. The guards were quickly neutralized one by one. The gladiators seized the armory and armed themselves with the swords there before leaving Capua. The escape plan had succeeded and the rebellion had officially begun. Spartacus and his companions took refuge on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius to avoid being easily found. This place was located in southern Italy and was like a natural fortress surrounded by olive groves and rocky terrain. At first, they were only 70 people. However, as news of the rebellion spread in Capua and its surroundings, slaves fleeing from their masters began to flock to the mountain. In a short time, the number of rebels reached the thousands. Roman authorities initially did not take seriously the news coming from the gladiator school in Capua. The reaction in the Senate was that this was merely a simple slave revolt. It would last 3 days, 5 days at most. For this reason, the first person assigned was a noble with no combat experience. Gaius Claudius Glaber was given an army of 3,000 men. However, this army consisted not of experienced soldiers, but of newly trained ordinary troops. Some were even volunteers. Glaber's mission, however, was simple. He would surround Spartacus and his men who had fled to the summit of Mount Vesuvius, starve them into submission, and force them to surrender. Mount Vesuvius was high and steep. Glaber had secured the only exit route. However, Spartacus and his men circled behind Glaber's camp and launched a sudden attack. Panic began among the Roman ranks. Glaber's army, unprepared for an attack, was completely scattered before they could understand what was happening. As swords tore through Roman armor, the gladiators' dream of freedom grew stronger and stronger. The destruction of Glaber's army was virtually a humiliation for Rome. The situation had now ceased to be a rebellion started by gladiators and had turned into a direct challenge to Rome's dominance. After news of the victory at Vesuvius began to spread, slaves from all corners of Rome started breaking their chains and joining Spartacus' ranks. Spartacus' army grew larger with each passing day. The numbers first reached 5,000, then 10,000, then 30,000. However, most of these people were ordinary slaves who had never held a sword in their lives and had no idea what war was. Spartacus established a military order together with his successful commander Circus. He forbade plundering and brought discipline to the slave army. The Roman Empire was now facing not a small rebellion, but a popular movement spreading across all of Italy. The Senate, however, could not afford a second humiliation. A new army was formed under the command of its important consuls Publius Varinius and Lucius Caecinius and sent against the rebels. Upon hearing this news, Spartacus divided his army into small groups and set ambushes for the Roman forces. Caecinius' army was completely destroyed in a sudden night raid near its camp. Then Varinius' units were trapped on a dense forest road and wiped out. Serious panic had now begun in the Senate. Rome's rural areas were burning. roads were being blocked, and trade was disrupted. Spartacus and his army had captured many cities such as Beneventum, Nola, Nuceria, Metapontum, and Turi. Rome is no longer laughing. The man they dismissed as a Slaveus shaking all of Italy. Spartacus is not just winning, he is waving at Rome. But this story does not end here. The real war begins now.